There. This one's very nice. Ow.
It's one of those amazing days for me. I'm supposed to lecture tomorrow morning on grace. I'm catching the winds of grace that are always blowing, and so I've just been immersing myself in scriptures talking about grace today, and it's just it's just beautiful when you expose yourself to these ideals and to these teachings from all the various aspects of different religions and different teachers. And you just start to get that inner feeling of the unity in all of them, and how almost every scripture can find a path to the other scripture. You know, it's like almost any scripture or any truth that you take, within that truth, all the other truths are contained. And it's just a great joy when you begin to see that, and such an unfolding of an excitement and a real hunger for knowing what is this secret? What is this secret that I can sense and feel and start to have a notion of, that's all around in everything? And you begin to just see it, you know, of course, at a very low level. I'm not talking about any super sensuous ideals of understanding things in some high spiritual profound way. But even at the level of knowledge, the mind knowledge that we talk about, this unity is accessible, and the unity of these teachings gives such an embrace, such a comfort to the mind and to the heart. It's just gorgeous, really. One of the things that I read today was a quote from the Divine Mother. She says, "The goal of life is to realize God and to be always immersed in the thought of Him." And in that thought, it lays a whole bunch of truth. This idea that grace is the only thing that brings us to realization, to knowing the truth of our existence, our relationship to all things, and the nature of our own being. You know, she mentions that we can have the grace of God and the grace of other religious institutions and the grace of all of these external things, but if we don't have the grace of our own mind, it's useless. It's useless. And the grace of our own mind is attained through purity of mind, by the removal of me and mine, which are our ungracious thoughts. Those are the thoughts that lock us into a karma, that lock us into the results of an action, that lock us into a sense of discontent, of not having the infinite available to us, of not having the immortal available to us. And so there's a constant hunger in the body and a constant need in the mind. And she gives us that great clue that I've talked about a few times this week, because this is the flow of my learning right now, is this idea of the mantra and how amazingly beautiful it is. The name of God, by whatever name you know God. It can be even your own nickname for God, like darling or sweetheart or honey bunch or whatever name you have for your lover, for your beloved. In its highest ideal, in that highest ideal. That name, repeated in the mind, gives birth to amazing thoughts of an ideal that is so high and so wonderful, and that requires a grace to accept, because you have to accept the notion that there is nothing in this body-mind that can give that to me. That this body-mind only produces hunger. And the only way to see the beauty of God in all of these manifested things is to let go entirely, because all beauty comes to an end. I went over to Brookside Gardens yesterday and was looking at these amazing summer flowers. And one of the things I said to my friend who was with me, I said, God, it's such an amazing thing in this world, how everything beautiful expires. Everything beautiful has an expiration date, and how there's meaning in that. That teaching alone, that knowledge alone, that seeing alone brings you to a renunciation that has you withdraw to your own immortal self, that unchanging self deep within, that we can find refuge in. And the way to that refuge is the name of God, the ideal of the beloved, not as in some magical third-party presence that's going to come down and rescue you as such. It may appear that way, it may happen that way within the mind's eye. But what we're talking about here is accessing your true nature by letting go of all ideation of a wrong nature, of a nature that isn't true, a nature that doesn't change or pass away, a nature that within you has been the same all along. And the only way to get there is through renunciation. And the only way to get a real renunciation is through discernment. And what is discernment? It's contemplation and thinking. Thinking. Seeing things as they are, not as you want them to be, not as you suspect them to be, but as they are, from a non-particular perspective. And that can be only accessed by a complete renunciation, by an absolute letting go. And that letting go can only happen by grace, because it takes an infinite amount of fearlessness to let go of everything. It takes an infinite amount of humility to say that you are nothing in particular, to rise above all forms of ego, and to accept this oneness of all things. And by accept, I mean it's something that has to be accepted, not just because it's true, but because you have to be willing to set down everything else. As long as you're holding on to a thing as something you need, want, hope for, desire, or have faith in, that one thing implies all the rest of things, and you cannot see the unity. You cannot enjoy the harmony. Anytime the mind is clinging to the results of any action, anytime the mind is clinging to the idea of a body and mind, in those ways, things are always broken into pieces. The reality seems like a multiplicity, and you can't have the infinite joy of that unity. You can't have the infinite joy of the knowledge of oneness. You can't have the infinite joy of knowing the immortality and the fact that it is your nature, that it is what and who you are at the source of things. And the name of God is the manifestation of grace, of that grace. It's what leads us to the idea of a love that's unconditioned, that leads us to the idea of a relationship that is not transactional. It's grace alone that can provide that idea, and it is the name of God through which it manifests, through which that knowledge will be touched by you. By you. It can be done. After all, grace implies it is nothing that you do. So accept that. Open to that. It will lead you to very interesting places that will suggest that perhaps you were never the doer of any particular thing. That there is a grander scheme, a riddle, as it were, that only comes undone when the last vestige of me and mine is resigned.